What's up, everybody, and welcome to my first ever tier list video. In this video, we are going to be ranking the best boxers inside the UFC currently, and I'm going to break this down into 4 different categories. So I'm going to do this a little bit different than maybe what you're familiar with, and I'm going to be ranking these guys based on great for the boxing ring. So if we pick them up today, this very moment, and dropped them in a boxing ring against, let's say, another, decent professional boxer, how would they do? Outstanding for MMA, a guy that is known inside the MMA world for having really good boxing, but there's some things that they do technically that may not transfer as well to the boxing ring against a professional boxer, which is kind of how I'm grading this. Good for MMA. They have good fundamentals when it comes to boxing, and then solid/decent for MMA. They have a good understanding and they do some good things, but maybe they're just not as good as some of the other people that we are going to mention in this video. But let's waste no time and hop right into this, starting with the very first one, who I think is the best pure boxer inside the UFC, and that is Jailton Almeida. I'm kidding. I was trying to see if you're still paying attention, man. Jailton Almeida. I'm just kidding. Obviously, he has atrocious striking. But for real, let's start with Alex Poatan Pereira, who I'm going to put in the solid/decent for MMA boxing. While Alex Pereira is an incredibly high-level striker and he has had some amateur boxing matches in the past, he has a pretty good understanding for obviously how to throw his hands. He tends to lack a little bit. Like, there's some sparring footage out there that we've seen him inside the boxing ring where he's sparring with a lot of guys, and he usually has a height and size advantage, so it's kind of hard to grade off of that. But he holds his hands very low. His stance is a little bit more Thai-esque, to where if we threw him in the boxing ring, it may not go particularly well regarding his stance. But inside of MMA, Alex Pereira does a pretty good job. He throws a really, really good jab. It's stiff. It's fast. He throws it in different variations. He's good at setting it up to the body, and we know about that left hook, which may be the best left hook in really just in combat sports right now. But overall, I think he's more of a kickboxer that does have pretty good hands whenever he uses them, even though he's kind of a little bit more left-hand dominant. He doesn't let the right hand go a ton. But I think overall, he has very solid hands in terms of MMA boxing. Moving on, we have Robert Whitaker, who I am going to also put inside the solid category. While Robert Whitaker is kind of known for his karate-esque style where he has really good movement, over the past few years, we've really seen Bobby Knuckles. If you've seen some of the countdowns, this man has really been working on his boxing. He kind of digs his feet in a little bit more at times. Not always. I'd like to see him sit on some shots a little bit more, but he does a lot of boxing sparring as well, right? Robert Whitaker's brought a boxing coach into his camp. He has a really good jab that he throws in different variations. He has pretty good movement. His stance is a little bit more boxing oriented these days. He has a very good jab, which any good boxer and any guy that really you can tell trains boxing, at kind of a high level, they're going to have a very good jab. Bobby Knuckles has good speed, good hand speed overall. He just lacks in terms of the variety in strikes that he's throwing with his hands at times, which is also something Alex Pereira kind of in that category as well, to where they do have good jabs, and Alex has a good left hook. Bobby Knuckles has a good popping left hook of his own, but they kind of lack the arsenal when it comes to throwing the hands a little bit. That's why I have Bobby Knuckles in more of the solid category. Okay, moving on. We have Jeff Hands of Steel Neal. Now, I'm going to put Jeff Neal in the good for MMA category. Now, I know that Jeff Neal, he's had some ups and downs throughout his career, but one thing we know about Jeff, he has a really good left hand, and he throws some nice combinations whenever he decides to let his hands go. The way he's relaxed, the way he has that good high guard, the way he moves in and out of range and kind of stalks you a little bit, but is patient, kind of slides out of the way. He has very good tight high guard defense. I think Jeff Neal has very good boxing fundamentals in terms of MMA, and that's predominantly how Jeff Neal gets his work done. He doesn't utilize his grappling a ton. He'll, throw kicks here and there, but mainly Jeff Neal is a guy that is getting it done with his hands. So without Jeff Neal's boxing, who knows where he would be. So this is a guy that relies heavily on the boxing, and I do think he has very good hands in terms of MMA boxing. Moving on. We have Bobby King Green, who I am also going to put in the good for MMA category. Now, I know you might say, well, whoa, what are you doing here? Bobby Green drops his hands and, he's kind of reckless out there. And I would agree. Bobby Green's kind of that killer be killed, do or die 50-50 type of fighter to where it's either him or somebody else that's getting finished usually, right? But Bobby Green, he trains a lot of boxing. That is really what his style kind of originated upon. You see him, boxing, sparring in gyms and a lot of different things. He has some good shoulder rolls that he uses. And any guy that holds their hands that low and is able to kind of roll with shots, twist and turn, and fire different punches at different angles, you can tell they really work on their boxing. And Bobby Green, we've seen even at UFC 300, the volume he's able to put out, the good straight shots, the variety that Bobby Green brings to the table. I think he has very good boxing fundamentals for MMA, but with his style, and the way it is, I don't think that it would be the best for a boxing ring or anything like that. And some of the defense he lacks a little bit, so that's kind of why I'm shying away from the outstanding category for him. But nonetheless, Bobby Green has very good boxing for MMA. Moving on, we have Jose Aldo Jr., who over the past few years has been a guy that, he was kind of known for his Muay Thai skills. He went and did a couple, boxing matches. And from what we saw in that recent outing against Jonathan Martinez before I decided to make this video, really, this is where I kind of made the decision. I think Jose Aldo has outstanding boxing for MMA. The way he is able to set up his combinations, the way he feints that lead hand, steps in and drills that left hook to the body, mixes up the targets, throws uppercuts, hooks, good straight shots down the middle. Jose Aldo displays all the skills, in my opinion, that show a good guy that has an outstanding understanding of boxing in terms of the MMA realm. And we have seen him do good in the boxing ring. Now, so you could argue and say, you know what, actually, I'm going to make an executive decision here. We're going to move Jose Aldo to great for the boxing ring because the guy had 2 professional boxing matches. There was a draw against Jeremy Stevens, and I really thought Jose Aldo won it. We saw the second time out. He's probably going to go back and box again at some point, and he has shown that he is more than capable of actually boxing in the ring. I'm going Jose Aldo for great boxing inside the ring. Okay. We have Adrian Yanez, right? This is a guy that has been on a little bit of a skid right now, right? He goes out there against Jonathan Martinez. He's had some issues here in the past. But one thing we've seen from Adrian Yanez is he's a guy that is so heavy in terms of the boxing. He doesn't particularly throw a lot of leg kicks. He doesn't grapple a lot. He has very good head movement, starts and stops with the jab, throws a variety of different shots at different angles. I honestly think Adrian Yanez is one of those guys where if he was not an MMA fighter, we could see Adrian Yanez inside the boxing ring. We've even heard guys say before when they're taking on when Rob Font was going to take on Adrian Yanez, we heard him say, look, this is a guy that's boxing with 4-ounce gloves out there. He has very good head movement, keeps his chin tucked, has very, very good boxing fundamentals, which is really what he started with prior to kind of migrating into the MMA realm. I think Adrian Yanez, if he decided, hey, I'm done with the UFC today, I'm going to start boxing, I think he would do just fine in terms of the boxing realm. He does drop his hands at times a little bit, but again, MMA is kind of a different animal, so you can get away with some things here, considering there's knees, kicks, elbows, and different variables. But I think Adrian Yanez would do a very solid job in the ring. That's why I'm listing him under this category here. Okay, moving on. We have the Boston finisher, Calvin Kattar. I'm going to put Calvin Kattar under the solid category here. While I know that people love to bring up, the boxing of Calvin Kattar, while he does have pretty good boxing, I would refer to it more as solid. I think he has a very good understanding. His style revolves heavily upon this, where he has a really good jab, and it kind of starts and stops with the jab for Calvin Kattar. He throws a good right hand, once he starts to kind of get your timing, and he does throw a good rear uppercut, but to me, he kind of lacks a little bit in terms of the volume. He's a little bit too hesitant at times, and he doesn't throw the variety as some of these other guys, but he does have very, very good straight punches. It's not to take anything away from Calvin Kattar. He has pretty solid boxing footwork, but I would list him more under the solid category in terms of boxing for MMA. And then next we have his teammate Rob Font, who has an exceptional jab, and I'm going to say Rob Font can go under the solid and decent for MMA category as well. Very similar to Calvin Kattar. These guys train together. They very much have the same style of approach. While I think Rob Font does maybe throw a little bit more in terms of the boxing, the combinations. We saw him land some good uppercuts on Adrian Yanez. The head movement lacks a little bit for me when it comes to Rob Font. He does have a good high guard that he kind of sits behind, but overall, he has a solid understanding of boxing. He does a good job in there in the MMA realm in terms of boxing, but I think it's more of a solid foundation when it comes to those two. Moving on, we have Brandon Moreno, who I am going to move to the good for MMA category. While I think Brandon Moreno, obviously coming off that performance against Brandon Royval, we kind of saw maybe Brandon Moreno wasn't completely in it. He just didn't seem to be feeling it that night. But from the improvements that we've seen from Brandon Moreno over the past few years, especially kind of in the saga with Deiveson Figueiredo, he was forced to really hit the pads, man, and really lace up the gloves and emphasize a heavy style in terms of the boxing. Brandon Moreno does have some good kicks we've seen him use. We know about the grappling of Brandon Moreno, but he's a guy who, you've seen him in the gym with Canelo a little bit. He has a very good understanding for boxing at this point in his career. He has a good jab. He throws a good variety of strikes. I think Brandon Moreno has a good high guard, good boxing, defense, and just an overall really good understanding of boxing for MMA. He has good footwork, good movement. He's patient. That's why I'm listing him under the good for MMA category. Okay. We have Steve Erceg, who I am going to be listing under the solid category. While we've inside the flyweight division outside of Brandon Moreno, I don't think we have a ton of nominations in terms of the boxing. But I do believe that Steve Erceg is possibly, him and Brandon Moreno are the two best boxers inside the flyweight division. Two of the best, I should say. And Steve Erceg's coming off that title shot against Alexandre Pantoja, and we've seen Steve Erceg do some great things with his hands. He has very good straight punches down the middle. He's got a good left hook. He's very patient. He's very technical. He's a sniper from the outside. But until we see a little bit more from him inside the UFC, I don't feel necessarily too comfortable moving him up too far in the rankings right now. But I will say this. He has made the list here because he does have solid boxing fundamentals for MMA. I like what Steve Erceg brings to the table. Okay, moving on. We have Sergey Pavlovich. We got to throw the big boys in there, man. I know people look at the heavyweights as kind of these brawlers and sluggers and this and that. I'm going solid here for Sergey Pavlovich. And while I think Sergey, obviously, he doesn't have outstanding head movement like some of the heavyweight boxers out there and some of those different things, this is how Sergey Pavlovich gets the job done. Every time you see this man hitting the pads, you see him training, he's hitting the bag, he's got the Clito Reyes gloves on, man. Like, this is a guy that likes to box. He has very good power in his hands. Good variety in terms of the boxing. He has a good high guard. He likes to mix up the different strikes that he's throwing, uppercuts, hooks, straight shots down the middle, overhand rights. I think Sergey Pavlovich has a very, very solid foundation for boxing. I just think the defense lacks a little bit. That's why I have him in the solid category. Moving on. The interim champion in the heavyweight division, Tom Aspinall, I am going to put in the good for MMA category. Obviously, we saw him go in there against Sergey Pavlovich. He ate a shot from Sergey, and you saw him kind of able to shake the cobwebs off. Tom Aspinall has really good head movement. We've seen him move his head, which was kind of the difference to me in that matchup with Sergey Pavlovich. He has very good movement. We know he's a fast, light, and nimble kind of guy, but he does slip his head off the center line. Sometimes he pulls back kind of like Volk with his hands down, so he's going to have to be careful of that moving forward. But Tom Aspinall has really good hands. He's got fast hands. He mixes up, the combinations in terms of the boxing. He's able to go to the body. He's got a good jab. He's got a really good right hand, good straight right hand down the middle. And combined with the footwork and the movement, I think Tom Aspinall has very good boxing for MMA. Okay, moving on. We have Alexander Volkanovski, who I'm going to put under the good for MMA category. Now, I know that Volk kind of comes off as maybe a little bit more of a kickboxer. He's a guy that's kind of shown that he likes to beat up the legs. He's a powerful guy. He's got some good grappling. But one thing about Volk that I think flies under the radar a little bit, his footwork, his angles, and the jab that he has really, in my opinion, kind of separate him from some of the other guys. You might say, well, Rob Font and some of these other guys do have a good jab, which you are right. But I think from what we've seen against Volkanovski and the competition that he's been in there with, like Yair or Max Holloway, I mean, he was in there with Holloway for 3 times, even though I thought Holloway won the second fight. That third fight with Max Holloway, you could argue and say, was basically a boxing match, and you saw how technical Alexander Volkanovski is in terms of the hands. I don't like how he backs away with his rear hand kind of, there, but his chin up in the air. And we saw him kind of that be a little bit of an issue against Ilia Topuria. But Topuria is a guy that I think has really good boxing. And Volkanovski was kind of landing the jab at will. So that's why I have Alexander Volkanovski as good for MMA. He's another guy that does some heavy boxing sparring as well. I should say heavy, but he does boxing spar. You saw in his last camp for Topuria. This man has a very good jab and a very good understanding of range management along with good footwork. I think Alexander Volkanovski falls under the good category. Moving on, Sean Strickland. Now, this is one that I think a lot of people are going to be like, oh, he's not that good of a boxer. He's this or that. And people have a very strong opinion on this. I'm going to go good for MMA here for Sean Strickland. While Sean Strickland might not have the variety that the other guys have, it's the Philly shell style of defense that brings him from the solid category up to the good category for me, because I believe Sean Strickland has a top 5 jab in all of MMA, maybe even the best possibly, right? I mean, Sean Strickland is a guy that when he throws the jab, he has a very tall upright stance, but when he throws this jab, man, it doesn't have a lot of telegraph and it seems to land on everybody. Guys that are taller than him, guys that, it doesn't matter who you are. Sean Strickland finds a way to land this jab, and you heard DDP say it's like a rock, man, and it just keeps hitting you. We saw the damage that he is able to cause with the jab. He lacks a little bit with the variety and the volume at times, but defensively, the way he kind of rolls with that Philly shell and some of the defensive techniques that he has, obviously flails his arms a little bit. We see him go in there and box with people, even guys that are actual boxers, and he does very, very well. He does roll his head underneath pretty well at times, doesn't have the best of head movement, but I do think that Philly shell style defense and that jab that Sean Strickland has really do kind of put him under the good category, because we've seen him just pick people apart with literally a jab and relying on the Philly shell. That's why I have Sean Strickland under the good category. Okay, moving on. We have Justin Gaethje, who I'm going to put under the solid, decent for MMA category. Now, I know that some people might say, well, okay, Justin Gaethje, he trains with Trevor Whitman. His boxing has improved, and maybe he's not the best boxer. He shouldn't even be on the list if you're in that realm. I think Justin Gaethje's made some really good improvements over the years. We saw specifically in the Michael Chandler matchup that he has very good head movement when he remembers to use it. He's able to slip his head off the center line. He's able to roll and duck his head underneath sometimes. He has a very bad habit of just ducking underneath a little bit too much, which could get him into trouble where he gets caught with a spinning back kick. But in terms of just boxing purely, Justin Gaethje, when he remembers to throw his jab as well, has a very fast and very good jab, very technical, throws a good uppercut, throws a good left hook, throws a good overhand. He's got a good straight right hand as well, has improved footwork from working with Trevor Whitman. I think Justin Gaethje has a very solid foundation in terms of the boxing, but in terms of the defense, it lacks for me. He takes a lot of damage at times and doesn't move his head a ton, and kind of forgets that at moments. That's why I kind of have him under the solid foundation for boxing. Moving on, we have Piotr No Mercy Jan, who I am going to put under the great for boxing in the ring category. Piotr Jan is a guy that actually is a master of sport in boxing. Online, you can even see some of his old footage of Piotr Jan where he's actually in there boxing. This guy is able to switch stances very well. We've kind of seen that, Bud Crawford, Marvin Hagler, guys that are able to kind of switch stances and utilize different techniques from both sides. Piotr Jan is one of those guys. The way his head movement, that good high guard, the way he kind of probes with that lead hand, dips his head underneath, bobs and weaves, mixes up the targets. Piotr Jan is an outstanding boxer who, over the past few years, from being at Tiger Muay Thai, has developed some really, really just good overall striking altogether. Some really good Thai technique as well. But this guy, through and through, at the end of the day, falls back on those basics of being a very good boxer, good straight punches, mixes things up really well. I think if you threw Piotr Jan in the ring, he would be able to do very well. Moving on, Max Blessed Holloway. Obviously, Maxie baby, after the BMF performance and even before that, the things that we've seen this man do, great for the boxing ring. I'm going with Max Holloway. Now, I know people may reference some of the damage and some of those different things when it comes to Max Holloway, but the later part of Max Holloway's career here, where he's kind of got sometimes a little bit lighter on his legs. We saw it in his last time out against Justin Gaethje, kind of got back to that wider base, that wider stance. And we've seen Max Holloway, the way, the volume, the output, the way he mixes up the targets, the way he mixes up the strikes, his defense, getting those hands up, rolling his head underneath after combinations, has really looked outstanding over his past couple fights, especially in the Justin Gaethje matchup. We've seen him sit on shots a little bit more to where he's able to dig in and actually, put people out. Back-to-back matchups, one down at 45 against the Korean Zombie, now against Justin Gaethje. Max Holloway's always been one of those guys that has outstanding volume, pretty good head movement. He does a really good job of getting his hands up now, rolling under, ducking under shots. I think Max Holloway would do a very good job in the boxing ring if we put him in there today. Moving on, Jack Della Maddalena, JDM, who's kind of bursted on the scene over the past year or so. I'm going to put JDM under the outstanding for MMA category. Now, what I mentioned to you before, I'm looking for a guy that mixes up the targets, adds variety. And what I like about JDM, we see subtle stance switches. We see him mix up the targets. We know about the body work that JDM is able to put in, where he kind of slips off his head off the center line, digs those good shots to the body. I think JDM has really good overall boxing. He's a guy that I think you might be able to put into the ring, but from the smaller sample size that we've seen thus far, I'm very comfortable, at least for right now, putting Jack Della Maddalena in the outstanding for MMA category. That's how this man gets the job done. It's strictly with the hands pretty much. I think JDM falls under the outstanding category at this point in time in his career. Moving on. A new guy that's going to be fighting at UFC 302 who has really just caught my eye over the past couple fights, and that is Joshua Van, who I am going to put under the outstanding for MMA category. And I know that this is a little bit early on in Josh Van's career, but from what I have seen from this guy, obviously he hasn't fought the cream of the crop competition like some of the other guys, so we always have to kind of put a little bit of an asterisk there. However, that's not Joshua Van's fault. He's on the come up, and from what we've seen from him, he does a really good job parrying shots, slipping his head off the center line, firing that jab, one to the head, two to the body, does a really, really good job of mixing up the targets, dig into the body, throw good straight shots down the middle, has good footwork, has a very good understanding of range. I really like what we have seen from Joshua Van when it comes to the boxing inside the UFC thus far and just throughout his MMA career period. I like Joshua Van. I think his boxing fundamentals are outstanding for MMA. Moving on, we have Chris Curtis, the action man, teammate of Sean Strickland. I'm going to put Chris Curtis under the good for MMA category. And I know that Chris Curtis is a guy that when we look at him, we, kind of see a little bit of that Philly shell, and you can tell that him and Sean Strickland train together. And this is how Chris Curtis gets the job done. Closing you down, backing you up against the fence, and letting his combinations go. Does a good job digging to the body. At times, kind of like Sean Strickland, lacks a little bit of the head movement, a little bit of the defense at times. He does a good job of raising the guard, raising his shoulders, deflecting shots. But I think in terms of the volume, the variety, in terms of throwing uppercuts, mixing it up, I think Chris Curtis does a little bit better of a job than Sean Strickland. But to me, it's just kind of more along the good category instead of outstanding. While I do think he has very good boxing, I would kind of just keep it at the very good category for me personally. Moving on, we have Sugar Sean O'Malley. I'm going to put Sugar Sean under the great for the boxing ring category. Sean O'Malley is a guy that has gotten into the sport of MMA at a young age, has trained all facets, and he has outstanding eyes, outstanding hand speed, outstanding understanding of range. His timing is impeccable. Sugar Sean O'Malley is a lot of things. Cringe is definitely one of them. He is not a good trash talker, except on Twitter, and X does a pretty good job there. But in terms of the microphone, he lacks a little bit of the charisma, I would say. But in terms of the skill set, Sean O'Malley is nothing shy of spectacular when it comes to the striking. He has really good hand speed. We've seen over the past couple years, he's gotten those hands up a little bit more than what he has in the past, which I feel very comfortable in terms of putting him in the boxing ring, because whenever you have your hands really low, it's not to say you can't be good that way, but he kind of blades his stance a little bit. He's got a good wide base, digs in on his shots, is able to throw, very different, throw different punches from different angles, dipping this way, throwing uppercuts, firing back with hooks, good straight punches down the middle, twisting his head to the side, firing straight shots down the middle, switching stances, giving you different looks. The feints are next level when it comes to Sean O'Malley. I think it's possible one day we see him step into the boxing ring, and I think whether he wins or loses, he will have a very good outing in terms of that. Okay, moving on. Dustin the Diamond Poirier. For Dustin Poirier, I'm going to go outstanding for MMA. While I think Dustin Poirier has shown us a lot of different things in terms of, the boxing, and he does have, when we're talking about best boxers in terms of the UFC, we do think of a guy like Dustin Poirier, but towards the later part of his career, he kind of drops his hands a little bit and swings some of these wild hooks. While they're very good in MMA, not exactly the best thing when it comes to boxing. He does have some good defense that has been a little bit more catered to the 4-ounce gloves. He kind of has a modified Stonewall Philly shell type of guard where he kind of ducks under, flares his elbow out, to try to, if you punch his elbow, obviously it's going to hurt your hand. But when you do that specifically, especially in boxing, you leave your entire midsection vulnerable to where I can see Poirier getting punished to the body a little bit. He does have good variety, and he does kind of mix up, the combinations. He switches stances. I just think the way that he's built it has been a little bit more MMA based, but I could still see him going into the boxing ring and doing some damage. But I think the other guys that I have nominated above him would maybe have a little bit of an edge when it comes to that aspect, but not taking anything away from Poirier because he's definitely in the outstanding category there. Moving on, we have the notorious Conor McGregor, who I'm going to put under the great for the boxing ring. Obviously, we saw him in there against Floyd Mayweather, went 10 rounds with the guy, did a really good job. We know Conor McGregor, he's a lot of different things. He's definitely a character. Maybe he's distracted and not the same guy he used to be. But one thing about Conor McGregor, he has outstanding timing. He has very good hand speed. He has a very good pull too, a good jab. He mixes up the targets. Everybody calls him just a left-handed puncher. He has a good left uppercut, a good uppercut with the lead hand that we see him use that is just absolutely spectacular. Conor McGregor's timing, his distance management, his footwork, the way he slides in and out, is able to pull his head just out of range, make you miss just barely, and counter with a good straight left hand. Conor McGregor falls under the great category, in my opinion. Moving on. Last but not least, we have Ilia Topuria, who I believe has the best traditional boxing base in all of MMA, and that is why I put him under the great for the boxing ring category. I think if you dropped Ilia Topuria off inside the boxing ring today, I believe he would have the most success out of everybody inside the UFC. You could think that that's crazy. You could think it's this. You could think it's that. He is a very good high guard. He uses the Philly shell very good as well. He has exceptional head movement. His stance is very bladed, very boxing-esque. The way he sways side to side, fires off that good jab. He says he's built his game kind of around Canelo. You can see it. The way he digs that hook to the body, the way he throws his uppercuts, his patience, his timing. I think Ilia Topuria is the best overall traditional boxer inside the UFC. And then last but not least, Jailton Almeida. Obviously, I'm joking. We'll put him under the outstanding category just for fun here. But I appreciate you all tuning in. If you made it to the end here, just comment Jailton Almeida, best boxer in the UFC, baby, or something like that. I don't know. But subscribe to the channel. Help your boy out. I appreciate you all. See you next time.